The autumn rain pounds against the tall windows of my Beacon Hill townhouse as I stand in what used to be my son's childhood bedroom, now converted into a guest suite that hasn't seen guests in months. In my trembling hands, I hold an empty prescription bottle that should have contained my heart medication, the pills that keep my 78-year-old heart beating steadily through each difficult day. The bottle is pristine, freshly washed, with not even a residue of the life-saving medication that was inside it just this morning. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My daughter-in-law Cassandra threw them away. All of them. $600 worth of specialized cardiac medication that took weeks to get approved through insurance. Gone because she decided my pill organizer on the kitchen counter was cluttering her aesthetic. She didn't ask. She didn't warn me. She simply disposed of what she deemed unnecessary while I was at my weekly doctor's appointment, and when I discovered the empty bottle, she looked at me with those cold blue eyes and said, "Margaret, you have so many pills everywhere." I was just trying to help organize. Surely you have backups somewhere. But I don't have backups. At my age, with my insurance restrictions and the complex approval process for cardiac medications, you don't simply replace what someone carelessly discards. Tonight, as my chest feels tight and my breathing grows shallow, I realize this isn't about medicine at all. This is about power, control, and a young woman who has systematically been positioning herself to inherit everything I've spent 78 years building. My name is Margaret Eleanor Whitfield. Though most people in Boston's financial district knew me simply as Maggie Whitfield, the woman who built Whitfield and Associates from a small accounting firm into one of New England's most respected wealth management companies. I started with nothing but a degree from Boston University, a fierce determination to prove myself in a man's world, and the unwavering belief that hard work and integrity would eventually pay off. They did pay off, beyond my wildest dreams. By the time I retired at 70, I had accumulated assets worth just over $12 million, including the Beacon Hill townhouse that had been my pride and joy for 30 years, a portfolio of carefully chosen investments, and the satisfaction of knowing I had provided employment for over 40 people throughout my career. I had built something lasting, something meaningful, something I could pass on to the next generation with pride. The next generation, I believed, was my son David. David Andrew Whitfield had been the center of my universe since his father, my late husband Thomas, died in a sailing accident when David was only 16. Those were the hardest years of my life, single-handedly raising a grieving teenager while building my business and trying to keep our family financially stable. David had been my motivation for everything. Every late night at the office, every difficult client, every strategic decision was made with his future in mind. David grew up to be everything I had hoped for. He earned his law degree from Harvard, started his own successful practice specializing in corporate mergers, and seemed to have inherited both his father's kindness and my business acumen. At 35, he was handsome, successful, and genuinely caring. When he brought Cassandra home 2 years ago, I wanted desperately to love her. Cassandra Walsh was 28, strikingly beautiful, with platinum blonde hair and the kind of polished appearance that spoke of expensive tastes and careful cultivation. She had grown up in Connecticut, the daughter of a family that had money but apparently not enough to satisfy her ambitions. She worked as an interior designer, though her portfolio seemed to consist mainly of projects for wealthy friends rather than paying clients. When David introduced her as his girlfriend, she was charming, attentive, and seemed genuinely interested in our family history. "Mrs. Whitfield," she had said during that first dinner, her voice warm and respectful. "David has told me so much about your business success. It's truly inspiring to meet a woman who built an empire from nothing. I hope someday you'll share some of your wisdom with me." I was flattered, and perhaps more vulnerable to flattery than I should have been. At 76, with most of my contemporaries either deceased or in declining health, having a young woman show interest in my life's work felt like a gift. Cassandra asked thoughtful questions about my investment strategies, seemed genuinely curious about the challenges I had faced as a woman in finance, and even volunteered to help organize some of my business papers that had accumulated in my home office. The courtship between David and Cassandra moved quickly, which should have been my first warning sign. Within 6 months of their meeting, they were engaged. Within a year, they were married in an elaborate ceremony at the Four Seasons that cost more than my first house. I paid for the wedding, of course, because David's happiness was worth any expense, and because Cassandra had mentioned several times how much it would mean to her to have a proper wedding that reflected David's position in Boston society. The early months of their marriage seemed blissful. David was happier than I had seen him since his father's death, constantly talking about Cassandra's talents, her intelligence, her plans to expand her design business. They moved into a beautiful Back Bay condo that I helped them purchase, and Cassandra threw dinner parties that became the talk of their social circle. She had a gift for entertaining, for making people feel welcome and important, and I found myself genuinely proud to call her my daughter-in-law. Cassandra also began spending more time at my townhouse, initially to help with what she called my organizational challenges. At 76, I had to admit that keeping track of medications, appointments, and household management had become more difficult. My housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, came 3 times a week, but Cassandra pointed out that I needed daily support, someone who understood my routine and could help me maintain my independence. Margaret, she would say, using my first name in a way that felt both respectful and intimate, you've been taking care of everyone else your whole life. Now it's time to let someone take care of you. I want to help you stay in this beautiful home as long as possible. David and I both know how much this house means to you. Her help was subtle at first. She would arrive with lunch and stay to organize my mail, set up my weekly pill organizer, or schedule maintenance appointments. She had a natural talent for household management, and I found myself grateful for her presence. The townhouse, which had begun to feel overwhelming, started to feel manageable again under her careful attention. Cassandra also encouraged me to update my estate planning, suggesting that my current will, which was over 5 years old, might not reflect my current wishes or take advantage of recent changes in tax law. She researched estate planning attorneys and even accompanied me to appointments, taking careful notes and asking intelligent questions about trust structures and tax implications. I know this might seem presumptuous, she said one afternoon as we sat in my lawyer's office, but I want to make sure David inherits everything you've worked for in the most efficient way possible. You've built something incredible, Margaret, and it would be a tragedy if poor planning diminished what you're able to pass on to him. Her concern seemed genuine, and her knowledge about financial planning was impressive for someone her age. When she suggested establishing a trust that would allow me to maintain control during my lifetime while ensuring David's inheritance was protected from taxes, it made perfect sense. When she recommended updating my power of attorney documents to include both David and herself, it seemed like responsible planning for my advancing age. The changes were gradual enough that I didn't notice the pattern until much later. Cassandra began arriving at my house earlier in the day and staying later into the evening. She started keeping some of her clothes in the guest room, claiming it was more convenient than going home to change between her design consultations and her time helping me. She began redirecting my mail to her address, explaining that it would help her keep track of my appointments and bills more efficiently. Most significantly, Cassandra gradually became the primary point of contact between me and the outside world. When my doctor's office called, they spoke with her.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
When my financial advisor needed to schedule meetings, he coordinated through her. When my few remaining friends called to make social plans, Cassandra would check my calendar and respond on my behalf. Margaret is having one of her difficult days, she would say, or Margaret's schedule is quite full this week, but I'll see if I can find some time for you. I rarely heard these conversations directly, but when I asked about missed calls or changed plans, Cassandra always had reasonable explanations that made me feel foolish for questioning her judgment. The isolation happened so gradually that I didn't recognize it as isolation. I simply found myself seeing fewer people, going out less frequently, and relying more heavily on Cassandra for everything from grocery shopping to social interaction. She assured me this was normal for someone my age, that my contemporaries were all experiencing similar limitations, and that I was fortunate to have family who cared enough to ensure my safety and comfort. David seemed thrilled with his wife's dedication to my care. During his increasingly infrequent visits, he would thank Cassandra effusively for her attention to my needs, and he would tell me how lucky I was to have such a caring daughter-in-law. When I occasionally mentioned feeling isolated or expressed concern about becoming too dependent on Cassandra's help, David would gently remind me that independence sometimes meant accepting help gracefully. "Mom, you raised me to be self-sufficient, but you also taught me the importance of family," he would say. "Cassandra loves you, and she wants to help you maintain your independence for as long as possible. Please don't let pride prevent you from accepting the support you need." His words always made sense in the moment, and I found myself pushing down my occasional unease about how much control Cassandra had assumed over my daily life. After all, she was family now, and family helps family. The alternative, moving to an assisted living facility or hiring live-in help, seemed far less appealing than accepting assistance from someone who genuinely seemed to care about my well-being. It was during this period of growing dependence that my health began to decline more noticeably. My cardiologist diagnosed me with atrial fibrillation, a condition that required careful medication management and regular monitoring. The prescription regimen was complex, involving 3 different medications taken at specific times throughout the day, and the consequences of missing doses or taking them incorrectly could be serious. Cassandra immediately took charge of my medication management, creating color-coded charts and setting up automated reminders on my phone. She researched my condition extensively and accompanied me to cardiology appointments, where she asked detailed questions about symptoms to watch for and emergency procedures. Her attention to my medical care was thorough and seemed genuinely motivated by concern for my health. "Margaret, I know managing all these medications feels overwhelming," she said as she organized my weekly pill dispenser, "but I want you to know that you don't have to worry about any of this alone. I'll make sure you never miss a dose, and I'll be watching for any concerning symptoms. David and I want you healthy and with us for many more years." Her dedication was touching, and I felt grateful to have someone so invested in my well-being. When she suggested that I add her name to my pharmacy account so she could pick up prescriptions and coordinate with my doctors more efficiently, it seemed like a sensible arrangement. When she recommended switching to a pharmacy that offered better coordination with my insurance and more convenient delivery services, I trusted her research and made the change. Looking back now, I can see how methodically Cassandra positioned herself as the indispensable intermediary between me and every aspect of my life. But at the time, each individual change seemed reasonable, helpful, and motivated by genuine care. I had no reason to suspect that the woman who organized my pills with such careful attention was already planning to throw them away. The first real warning sign came 6 months ago, during a conversation I overheard between Cassandra and someone on the phone. I had been napping in my study when the sound of her voice in the kitchen woke me. The conversation was muffled, but I caught fragments that made my blood run cold. "The medication management alone is exhausting," she was saying, "and the doctor says her condition is only going to get worse. David feels guilty, of course, but he knows it's not sustainable long-term. The house alone is worth at least $4 million, and that's not counting the investment portfolio." I strained to hear more, my heart pounding in a way that had nothing to do with my cardiac condition. Cassandra's voice continued, clearer now as she moved closer to the kitchen window. "She's surprisingly sharp still, but the physical decline is obvious. I've been handling all her finances for months now, so the transition should be relatively smooth when the time comes. David trusts me completely with these decisions, and honestly, Margaret seems relieved not to have to worry about the details anymore." The conversation ended before I could hear more, but those few sentences fundamentally changed how I perceived my daughter-in-law's devotion. For the first time, I realized that Cassandra's careful attention to my care might be motivated by something other than love for me, or even love for David. I began to understand that I might be viewed less as a beloved family member and more as an asset to be managed until it could be inherited. That night, I lay awake in my bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every interaction I'd had with Cassandra over the past 18 months. The careful cultivation of my dependence on her, the systematic isolation from my friends and previous support systems, the gradual assumption of control over my finances, medical care, and daily routine. The positioning of herself as indispensable to my well-being, while simultaneously cataloging my declining health for someone else's benefit. I realized with growing horror that I had allowed myself to become trapped in my own home, dependent on someone who was counting the days until my death would make her wealthy. But even with this terrible new awareness, I had no idea how to extricate myself from the situation Cassandra had so carefully constructed around me. The medicine incident 3 days ago was simply the final piece of evidence I needed to understand that my suspicions weren't the paranoid delusions of an aging woman, but the accurate perceptions of someone who had finally recognized the danger she was in. When Cassandra threw away my heart medication and looked at me with such casual indifference to the potential consequences, I understood that my life was worth less to her than her aesthetic preferences. But what Cassandra doesn't know is that building a $12 million fortune requires more than just business acumen. It requires the ability to recognize threats, plan strategic responses, and execute decisions with precision and timing. At 78, my mind is as sharp as it was when I was building my company, and my survival instincts are stronger than ever. If Cassandra wants to play games with my life, I'm prepared to play games with her inheritance. But unlike her, I've been playing these games for decades, and I don't intend to lose. The morning after discovering my missing medication, I wake with a clarity that surprises me. My chest still feels tight from skipping yesterday's doses, but my mind feels sharper than it has in months. Perhaps it's the adrenaline of finally understanding my situation, or maybe it's the relief of no longer pretending that everything is normal. Whatever the cause, I feel more like my old self than I have since Cassandra entered our lives. I dress carefully in my navy blue Chanel suit, the one I used to wear to important board meetings. If I'm going to reclaim control of my life, I need to look and feel like the woman who built Whitfield & Associates, not the confused elderly woman Cassandra has convinced everyone I've become. My reflection in the antique mirror shows someone who looks formidable despite her age, and I smile at the familiar sight of Margaret Whitfield dressed for battle. My first stop is my doctor's office, where I arrive 40 minutes before they open and wait in my car until the staff arrives. Dr. Amanda Foster has been my cardiologist for 8 years, and she knows my medical history better than anyone. When her nurse finally unlocks the door, I'm the first person through it. "Mrs. Whitfield," the receptionist says with surprise, "you don't have an appointment until next week. Is everything all right?" "I need to speak with Dr. Foster immediately about my medication," I say, using the tone that once made corporate executives scramble to accommodate my requests. It's urgent. 20 minutes later, I'm sitting across from Dr. Foster in her office, explaining the situation while she reviews my chart with growing concern. Dr. Foster is in her early 50s, brilliant and refreshingly direct in her communication style. She doesn't patronize her elderly patients or speak to family members instead of the patient, which is why I've remained loyal to her practice despite its inconvenient downtown location. "Mrs. Whitfield, missing 3 days of your cardiac medication is extremely serious," she says, her voice carrying the professional calm that masks genuine alarm. "Your atrial fibrillation requires consistent medication levels to prevent blood clots and stroke. Who exactly has access to your medications?" I explain Cassandra's role in managing my prescriptions, the pharmacy account access, and yesterday's casual disposal of my pills. Dr. Foster's expression grows increasingly troubled as I speak. "I'm going to be very direct with you," she says when I finish. "Based on what you're telling me, someone with access to your medications deliberately created a dangerous situation for you. Whether or not they understood the medical implications, this constitutes a form of medical neglect that could have killed you." Her words confirm what I already knew, but hearing them from a medical professional gives me the ammunition I need for what comes next. Dr. Foster immediately calls in a prescription to a different pharmacy, one that Cassandra has never heard of, and she changes all my medical records to remove Cassandra's name from my authorized contacts list. "Mrs. Whitfield, I'm also going to recommend that you consider speaking with someone about elder abuse," she says as she hands me the new prescription information. "What you've described fits a pattern of isolation and control that we're trained to recognize. There are resources available to help you." Elder abuse. The words hit me like a physical blow, not because they're inaccurate, but because they force me to confront how completely I've allowed myself to be manipulated. I, who spent 40 years negotiating complex business deals and protecting my clients' assets from every conceivable threat, have been systematically victimized by a 28-year-old woman who saw my loneliness and exploited it for financial gain. but I'm not ready for outside intervention yet. Before I involve authorities or social services, I need to understand the full scope of what Cassandra has done and gather evidence that will protect both David and myself from the legal complications that are surely coming. I thank Dr. Foster for her candor and promise to consider her recommendations, but I don't mention that I'm already formulating a plan that goes far beyond simply protecting myself from medical neglect. My next stop is the new pharmacy, where I pick up my medications and pay for them with a credit card that Cassandra has never seen. The pharmacist, a kind woman in her 30s, carefully explains the timing and dosage requirements as if I've never heard them before. I don't mind the repetition. After yesterday's scare, I want to be absolutely certain I understand every aspect of my medical care. From the pharmacy, I drive to downtown Boston and the offices of Hartwell, Morrison & Associates, the law firm that has handled my estate planning for the past 15 years. Jonathan Hartwell is roughly my age, a Harvard-educated attorney who has represented several generations of Boston's old money families. More importantly, he's someone who knew me before Cassandra entered my life. Someone who remembers Margaret Whitfield as a competent businesswoman rather than a declining elderly widow. "Maggie," Jonathan says warmly as his secretary shows me into his corner office overlooking Boston Harbor. "What a wonderful surprise. Though I have to say, you look like you're here on business rather than for a social visit." Jonathan's office is a masterpiece of traditional New England elegance, with leather-bound law books, Persian rugs, and portraits of distinguished ancestors watching from gilded frames. It's the kind of environment where important decisions have been made for centuries, and sitting here, I feel my confidence returning in waves. "Jonathan, I need you to review every change that's been made to my estate planning documents over the past 18 months, I say without preamble. I also need you to investigate whether any of those changes were made under circumstances that might constitute undue influence." Jonathan's eyebrows rise slightly, but his expression remains professionally neutral. He's handled enough family disputes over the years to recognize the signs of trouble before they explode into full-scale litigation. "Maggie, that's a serious allegation. Can you tell me what's prompted this concern?" I spend the next hour detailing Cassandra's systematic assumption of control over my life, the gradual isolation from my previous support systems, and yesterday's medication incident. Jonathan takes careful notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions about timing and specific incidents. His legal mind is clearly cataloging potential causes of action, while his personal concern for my well-being shows in his increasingly grave expression. "Maggie, what you're describing sounds like a textbook case of financial elder abuse," he says when I finish. "The isolation, the assumption of control over your daily life, the positioning of herself as indispensable while documenting your decline. These are established patterns that courts recognize as predatory behavior." He pulls my estate planning file from his cabinet and begins reviewing the documents that have been created or modified since Cassandra entered my life. As he reads, his frown deepens. "Several of these changes are quite significant," he says, looking up from the papers. "The power of attorney documents, the trust modifications, the updated beneficiary designations. Individually, each change seems reasonable, but taken together, they represent a fundamental shift in how your estate would be administered and distributed." Jonathan explains that the current documents give both David and Cassandra broad authority to make financial and medical decisions on my behalf, and that the trust structure has been modified to provide them with immediate access to substantial funds for my care and maintenance. Most troubling, "Maggie, I have to ask you directly, did you fully understand these changes when you signed them? And did you sign them of your own free will without pressure or coercion?" The question forces me to confront an uncomfortable truth. While I wasn't technically coerced into signing the documents, I also wasn't given complete information about their implications. Cassandra had presented each change as a minor modification that would make things easier for everyone involved, and I had trusted her explanations without seeking independent advice or taking time to fully consider the consequences. "Jonathan, I signed them because I trusted Cassandra's explanations, and because she convinced me that these changes were in David's best interest, I admit. But I'm realizing now that I may not have received complete or accurate information about what I was signing." Jonathan nods grimly. "That's enough to establish grounds for challenging these documents, especially combined with the pattern of behavior you've described. But Maggie, I need to warn you that this process could become very ugly very quickly." If we challenge these documents, we're essentially accusing Cassandra of elder abuse and fraud. That's going to create serious problems in your relationship with David, and it's going to expose your family to public scrutiny that could be damaging for everyone involved. I appreciate Jonathan's honesty, but I've already considered these consequences. My relationship with David is already damaged, whether he realizes it or not. His wife has systematically isolated him from me while positioning herself to inherit everything I've built. The only question now is whether I'm going to allow that manipulation to succeed or whether I'm going to fight back with every resource at my disposal. Jonathan, I want you to prepare new estate planning documents that revoke everything Cassandra has influenced me to sign, I say firmly. I want a will that reflects my true wishes, power of attorney documents that protect my autonomy, and trust structures that ensure my assets are used for my benefit during my lifetime. And I want all of this done quietly, without Cassandra's knowledge, until I decide how and when to confront her. Jonathan agrees to begin the process immediately, but he also insists that I consider additional protective measures. He recommends hiring a private investigator to document Cassandra's behavior and financial activities, and he suggests consulting with a geriatric care manager who can assess my living situation and provide independent recommendations about my care needs. Maggie, if this situation escalates into litigation, you're going to need more than legal arguments, he warns. You're going to need evidence that demonstrates your competency, your independence, and the predatory nature of Cassandra's behavior. The more documentation we have, the stronger your position will be. I leave Jonathan's office with a clear action plan and a renewed sense of purpose. For the first time in months, I feel like I'm taking control of my life, rather than simply reacting to circumstances that someone else has created. But I also understand that the real battle is just beginning. Cassandra has spent 18 months positioning herself as my devoted caretaker, and she's not going to give up that position without a fight. My next stop is Boston Private Bank, where my investment portfolio has been managed for over 20 years. Richard Sullivan, my financial advisor, is someone else who remembers me as a successful businesswoman rather than a declining widow. More importantly, he has access to detailed records of every financial transaction that has occurred since Cassandra entered my life. Mrs. Whitfield, Richard says as he welcomes me into his office, I'm delighted to see you, though I have to say it's unusual for you to visit without Mrs. Walsh. Is she joining us later? The fact that Richard expects Cassandra to attend my financial meetings confirms how thoroughly she has inserted herself into every aspect of my life. For the past year, she has accompanied me to every meeting with Richard, taking notes and asking questions that positioned her as my primary financial decision-maker. Richard, I'm here alone today because I need to review my accounts without any outside influence, I say, settling into the familiar leather chair across from his desk. I want to understand exactly what transactions have occurred over the past 18 months, and I want to know who authorized each of them. Richard's expression becomes carefully neutral as he accesses my account information on his computer. Like Jonathan, he's experienced enough to recognize the signs of a family dispute brewing, and he's clearly preparing to document this conversation carefully. Mrs. Whitfield, your accounts have been quite active recently, he says, scrolling through screens of transaction data. There have been several significant withdrawals and transfers, all properly authorized according to your power of attorney documents. As Richard walks me through the financial activity, a disturbing pattern emerges. Over the past year, nearly $2 million has been withdrawn from my investment accounts for what the documentation describes as care-related expenses and home maintenance costs. The withdrawals were all properly authorized by Cassandra using her power of attorney authority, and they were all deposited into accounts that I had never seen before. Richard, can you tell me exactly where these funds were deposited? I ask, though I already suspect the answer. The transfers went to accounts controlled by your son and daughter-in-law for expenses related to your care, he explains. The documentation indicates these funds were used for home health services, medical equipment, property maintenance, and other costs associated with maintaining your independence. But I know that I haven't received $2 million worth of care services in the past year. My medical expenses are covered by insurance, my home maintenance costs are minimal, and I certainly haven't received any expensive home health services. This money has been systematically stolen from my accounts under the guise of paying for my care, and Cassandra has been careful to create documentation that makes the theft appear legitimate. Richard shows me additional concerning transactions. My brokerage accounts have been restructured to provide Cassandra with broader trading authority, and several high-performing investments have been sold at significant losses, with the proceeds transferred to the same care-related accounts. Most troubling, my safe deposit box has been accessed multiple times by Cassandra, though the bank has no record of what items were removed or deposited. Mrs. Whitfield, I have to ask whether you're satisfied with how your accounts are being managed, Richard says carefully. These transactions are all technically legitimate, but the pattern of activity is unusual for someone with your investment philosophy and risk tolerance. I explain that I want all of Cassandra's access to my accounts revoked immediately, and I request detailed documentation of every transaction she has authorized. Richard agrees to freeze any further transfers pending my review, but he warns me that Cassandra could potentially challenge these changes, using her existing power of attorney authority. Mrs. Whitfield, until you formally revoke those documents, Mrs. Walsh retains legal authority to manage your financial affairs, he explains. I can implement temporary restrictions, but she could potentially force us to restore her access through legal action. This information reinforces my determination to move quickly with the new estate planning documents Jonathan is preparing. Until I formally revoke Cassandra's authority, she retains the legal right to continue stealing from my accounts under the pretense of managing my care. As I leave the bank with copies of my transaction records, I'm stunned by the scope of Cassandra's financial manipulation. $2 million stolen over 18 months, with careful documentation designed to make the theft appear legitimate. This isn't opportunistic theft by someone who stumbled into a position of trust. This is systematic financial abuse by someone who planned and executed a sophisticated scheme to steal my life savings. But what disturbs me most isn't the money, substantial though the loss may be. What disturbs me is the realization that Cassandra has been planning for my death from the moment she met David. Every expression of care, every helpful gesture, every moment of apparent devotion has been part of a calculated effort to position herself to inherit everything I've built. She hasn't been caring for me. She's been harvesting me. My final stop of the day is the most difficult. I drive to David's law office in downtown Boston, knowing that this conversation will fundamentally change our relationship regardless of how it unfolds. David works in a sleek glass tower that represents everything I hoped he would achieve when I sacrificed so much to pay for his education. Seeing him in his corner office, successful and confident, reminds me why protecting his future has been my primary motivation for everything I've built. But I also know that David has been manipulated by Cassandra just as thoroughly as I have, and possibly for even longer. The caring daughter-in-law who helps manage his aging mother's affairs is the same person who has systematically stolen from me while documenting my decline for her own benefit. David's trust in his wife is about to be shattered, and I'm the one who has to shatter it. Mom, David says with genuine pleasure as his secretary shows me into his office. What a wonderful surprise. Is everything all right? You look upset. David is tall and handsome like his father, with the same warm brown eyes and easy smile that made me fall in love with Thomas 35 years ago. At 35, he has achieved everything I dreamed for him, and the love in his eyes when he looks at me is completely genuine. But I also see something else in his expression, a subtle concern that suggests he too has been told that my mental faculties are declining. David, I need to talk to you about Cassandra, I begin, choosing my words carefully. I've discovered some things about her behavior that I think you need to know. David's expression immediately becomes guarded, and I realize that Cassandra has probably prepared him for this conversation. She's likely told him that my age is making me paranoid or suspicious, and that he should expect me to eventually turn against her as my condition deteriorates. Mom, if this is about the medicine incident yesterday, Cassandra already explained what happened, he says gently. She was trying to help organize your medications, and there was a miscommunication about which pills were current. She feels terrible about the confusion, and she's already talked to your pharmacy about getting replacements. David's explanation reveals how skillfully Cassandra has reframed yesterday's incident. What was actually a deliberate disposal of my life-saving medication has become a well-intentioned organizational effort that went wrong. The fact that I could have died from missing those doses has been minimized as a miscommunication that has already been resolved. David, it wasn't a miscommunication, I say firmly. Cassandra threw away $600 worth of cardiac medication because she decided my pill organizer was cluttering her aesthetic. When I confronted her about it, she showed no concern for the medical consequences and suggested I should have backups available. David's frown deepens, but I can see him struggling to reconcile my account with Cassandra's version of events. He loves us both, and he desperately wants to believe that there's a reasonable explanation for what appears to be an irreconcilable conflict. Mom, I know Cassandra can sometimes be a little too focused on organization and aesthetics, he says carefully, but she would never deliberately endanger your health. She's been incredibly dedicated to your care, and honestly, I don't know what we would have done without her help over the past year. His response reveals how completely Cassandra has convinced him of her indispensability. In David's mind, his wife has sacrificed her own comfort and convenience to care for his aging mother, and any criticism of her behavior reflects poorly on my judgment rather than her actions. I realize that David isn't going to believe my accusations without evidence, and I'm not ready to share what I've discovered today without first securing my legal and financial position. Instead, I focus on planting seeds of doubt that might make him more receptive to the truth when I'm ready to present it fully. David, I want you to know that I've been reviewing my estate planning documents with Jonathan Hartwell, I say, watching his reaction carefully. Some of the changes that have been made over the past year don't reflect my true wishes, and I'm going to be making some modifications. David's expression becomes even more concerned. Mom, what kind of modifications? Your current estate plan is very comprehensive, and it ensures that your assets will be managed properly if your health declines further. Cassandra spent a lot of time researching the best strategies for your situation. The fact that David credits Cassandra with researching my estate planning strategies confirms my suspicions about who was really driving those changes. David may have signed the documents as my son and heir, but Cassandra was the architect of the modifications that benefit her most directly. David, I'm 78 years old, not 98, I say with some of my old authority. My mind is perfectly clear, and I'm capable of making my own decisions about my estate planning. The current documents give Cassandra far more control over my affairs than I'm comfortable with, and I intend to change that. David looks genuinely distressed by this conversation, and I can see him struggling to balance his loyalty to me with his trust in his wife. From his perspective, I'm an aging woman who's becoming paranoid and suspicious of the person who has been most devoted to my care. He's probably been told to expect this kind of behavior as my condition deteriorates. Mom, I understand that you want to maintain control over your affairs, he says gently, but Cassandra and I are only trying to help you stay independent for as long as possible. The power of attorney documents and trust structures are there to protect you and ensure that your care needs are met without forcing you to move to a facility. His words echo almost exactly what Cassandra told me when she convinced me to sign those documents. David genuinely believes he's protecting my independence, not realizing that the documents actually strip away my autonomy and give his wife unprecedented control over my life and assets. I realize that this conversation isn't going to accomplish what I hoped. David has been too thoroughly manipulated to accept my concerns without overwhelming evidence, and I don't yet have the documentation I need to prove my case. Instead, I decide to end this meeting on a note that preserves our relationship, while putting him on notice that changes are coming. David, I love you more than anything in this world, I say, reaching across his desk to touch his hand. Everything I've built has been for you, and I want to make sure it's protected properly. I'm not making any hasty decisions, but I am going to ensure that my estate planning reflects my true wishes rather than what other people think is best for me. David squeezes my hand, and I can see the genuine love and concern in his eyes. He's not part of Cassandra's scheme. He's another victim of her manipulation. But he's also not ready to see the truth about his wife, and forcing him to confront that truth before I have irrefutable evidence could drive him away from me permanently. As I leave David's office, I understand that the battle ahead will be more complex than simply exposing Cassandra's behavior. I also have to find a way to save my relationship with my son while protecting both of us from his wife's predatory schemes. The next phase of my plan will require even more careful strategy and flawless execution. But tonight, as I sit in my study reviewing the evidence I've gathered today, I feel something I haven't felt in months. Hope. For the first time since Cassandra entered our lives, I'm not simply reacting to her manipulations. I'm planning my own strategy, and I'm playing to win. Tomorrow, the real work begins. The morning of my confrontation with Cassandra arrives with unseasonable warmth for October in Boston. Golden sunlight streams through the tall windows of my study as I review the documents that will change everything. Jonathan worked through the weekend to prepare new estate planning papers that revoke every modification Cassandra influenced me to make. The power of attorney documents now restrict authority to essential medical decisions only, with specific language preventing any financial transactions without my explicit written consent. Most importantly, the new will removes all provisions that would benefit Cassandra directly or indirectly, instead establishing a charitable foundation that will manage my assets for causes I genuinely care about. The private investigator Jonathan recommended has provided a comprehensive report on Cassandra's activities that goes far beyond what I discovered on my own. Jessica Martinez is a former police detective who specializes in financial elder abuse cases, and her findings paint a picture of systematic fraud that is both more extensive and more calculated than I had imagined. According to her investigation, Cassandra has been living a double life that rivals the most sophisticated con artists. Jessica's report reveals that Cassandra Walsh isn't even her real name. She was born Cassandra Murphy in Hartford, Connecticut, to a middle-class family with no particular wealth or social standing. Her background in interior design consists of a certificate program at a community college and a series of short-term jobs with decorating firms that ended when clients complained about missing items or unauthorized charges. Most disturbing, this isn't her first marriage to a wealthy older man. 7 years ago, she was married briefly to a retired pharmaceutical executive in Newport, Rhode Island, a relationship that ended when his adult children discovered she had systematically drained his accounts while he was recovering from a stroke. The pattern is identical to what she's done to me, right down to the careful isolation from family and friends, the assumption of medical and financial authority, and the documentation of the victim's declining health to justify her control. The difference is that her previous victim's children intervened before she could complete her scheme, forcing her to disappear with approximately $300,000 in stolen assets. No charges were ever filed because the family wanted to avoid the publicity and legal complications of a prosecution. Jessica's investigation also uncovered the sophisticated network Cassandra has created to hide her theft of my assets. The care management company that supposedly provides my home health services exists only on paper, with all payments flowing directly to accounts controlled by Cassandra. The medical equipment purchases listed in my financial records correspond to items that were never delivered to my home. Even the property maintenance expenses are fraudulent, with invoices from contractors who have never set foot on my property. Most cleverly, Cassandra has been systematically replacing my valuable possessions with high-quality reproductions while selling the originals through discreet auction houses. The investigation revealed that several pieces from my art collection, including a Winslow Homer watercolor worth over $200,000, have been sold and replaced with copies so skillful that I never noticed the substitution. My jewelry collection has been similarly harvested, with pieces gradually replaced by costume replicas, while the originals are converted to cash through estate jewelry dealers. Jessica estimates that Cassandra has stolen over $3 million in cash and assets during our 18-month relationship, all while maintaining the fiction that she's sacrificing her own comfort to care for me. The sophistication of the scheme suggests years of planning and experience, confirming that David and I were targeted specifically for our wealth and vulnerability, rather than being victims of opportunity. Armed with this evidence, I'm finally ready to confront Cassandra directly. But I'm not going to simply accuse her and hope for a confession. Instead, I've developed a strategy that will force her to reveal her true nature while protecting my interests and giving David irrefutable proof of his wife's character. Cassandra arrives at my house Tuesday morning with her usual facade of cheerful devotion, carrying fresh flowers and a bag of groceries as if she's the loving daughter-in-law whose only concern is my well-being. She's dressed in one of her carefully selected outfits that project both sophistication and accessibility, a cream-colored cashmere sweater and tailored pants that probably cost more than most people earn in a month. "Margaret, you look wonderful today," she says with the bright smile that once made me feel genuinely cared for. I brought ingredients for that soup you mentioned loving, and I thought we could spend the afternoon organizing your closet. I noticed some of your winter clothes could use updating. The casual mention of organizing my closet takes on sinister, meaning now that I understand her pattern of gradually removing valuable items while appearing to help. I wonder how many more pieces of my mother's jewelry or my grandmother's silver have already been earmarked for replacement and sale. Cassandra, I'm glad you're here, I say with matching warmth. I've been doing some thinking about my future, and I'd like to discuss some important decisions with you. I lead her to my study, where I've carefully arranged the documents Jessica provided, along with financial statements showing the scope of her theft. Cassandra settles into the chair across from my desk with the confident air of someone who believes she controls this conversation. She has no idea that this is her performance review, and she's about to be terminated. I've been reviewing my estate planning with Jonathan Hartwell, I begin, watching her reaction carefully. Some interesting discrepancies have come to light regarding my financial accounts and asset management. Cassandra's expression remains perfectly composed, but I notice a slight tightening around her eyes that suggests heightened alertness. She's been preparing for this conversation, probably since the medication incident made it clear that I was becoming suspicious of her activities. Oh, that's wonderful that you're staying on top of your planning, she says smoothly. David and I want to make sure everything is structured properly to protect your interests. What kind of discrepancies did Jonathan find? Her response is perfectly calibrated to sound supportive while fishing for information about what I might have discovered. She's clearly hoping that Jonathan found minor errors that can be explained away rather than evidence of systematic fraud. Well, for example, I was surprised to learn that over $2 million has been withdrawn from my investment accounts over the past 18 months for care-related expenses, I say, opening the financial statements. I don't recall receiving $2 million worth of care services, do you? Cassandra's composure slips almost imperceptibly, but she recovers quickly with a concerned frown that suggests she's just as surprised by this information as I am. Margaret, that does seem like a lot, she says thoughtfully, but you have to remember that quality care is expensive, and we've been very focused on allowing you to maintain your independence. The home health services, the medical equipment, the property modifications to make the house safer for you, all of that adds up more quickly than you might expect. Her explanation sounds reasonable on the surface, exactly the kind of response that would convince someone who wasn't looking carefully at the details. But I have the details now, and I'm ready to share them. Cassandra, I've had an investigator review these expenses in detail, I say, removing Jessica's report from the desk drawer. The home health service company that supposedly provides my care exists only on paper. The medical equipment that was allegedly purchased was never delivered to this house. The property modifications that justified hundreds of thousands in expenses were never performed. I watch Cassandra's face as I speak, and for the first time since I've known her, I see genuine emotion beneath her carefully constructed mask. It's not shame or remorse, as I might have hoped. It's calculating fury, the reaction of someone whose carefully planned scheme has been exposed before it could be completed. Margaret, I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding, she says, her voice still steady but with an edge that wasn't there before. These financial matters are very complex, and sometimes the documentation doesn't clearly reflect the services that were provided. I've been managing these expenses in coordination with David and your medical team to ensure you receive the best possible care. She's still trying to maintain her cover story, but I can see the wheels turning as she evaluates her options. She knows I have evidence that could destroy her, but she's not ready to abandon her position without a fight. There's more, Cassandra, I continue, enjoying the growing tension in her posture. My art collection has been systematically replaced with reproductions, while the originals are sold at auction. My jewelry has been similarly harvested and replaced with costume pieces. Even my safe deposit box has been accessed repeatedly, though I have no memory of authorizing those visits. Now Cassandra's mask slips completely. The warm, caring expression disappears, replaced by cold calculation that transforms her entire appearance. For the first time, I'm seeing the real person behind the performance, and she's nothing like the woman who convinced me she loved me like family. Margaret, I think your age is making you paranoid, she says, her voice taking on a sharp edge. These accusations are serious, and frankly, they're concerning. I've devoted the past 18 months to your care, sacrificing my own career and personal time to ensure your well-being. The fact that you're now questioning my motives suggests that perhaps your judgment isn't as reliable as you believe. Her response reveals the strategy she's prepared for this moment. She's going to claim that my accusations are evidence of cognitive decline, mental illness, or paranoid delusions brought on by aging. It's a clever approach because it discredits my evidence while positioning her as the long-suffering caretaker who's being unfairly attacked by an ungrateful patient. But I've anticipated this response, and I'm ready for it. Cassandra, or should I call you Cassandra Murphy? I ask, watching her face go completely white. Jessica Martinez did very thorough research into your background, including your previous marriage to Harold Pemberton in Newport. The pattern of behavior is remarkably consistent. Isolation of the victim, assumption of financial control, systematic theft disguised as care expenses, and documentation of cognitive decline to justify your authority. The mention of Harold Pemberton's name hits Cassandra like a physical blow. She clearly believed her previous identity was buried deeply enough to avoid discovery. And learning that I know about her history tells her that I have resources and determination she hadn't anticipated. I don't know what kind of lies someone has told you, she says, but her voice lacks conviction now. Harold Pemberton was a confused elderly man whose children were looking for someone to blame for his poor financial decisions. I tried to help him just like I've tried to help you, and I was rewarded with false accusations and legal threats. Her explanation confirms everything Jessica discovered while revealing even more about her character. She's not just a thief. She's someone who genuinely believes her victims deserve what happens to them. In her mind, elderly people with substantial assets are legitimate prey, and anyone who tries to protect them is simply interfering with natural selection. Cassandra, I want you to listen very carefully, I say, leaning forward in my chair. I know exactly what you are and what you've done. I have documentation of every fraudulent transaction, every forged authorization, every piece of property you've stolen. I have evidence of your real identity and your previous crimes. Most importantly, I have new estate planning documents that revoke every bit of authority you've managed to acquire over my affairs. I slide the new power of attorney documents across the desk, and Cassandra reads them with growing alarm. The carefully constructed legal framework that gave her control over my life and assets has been completely dismantled, leaving her with no more authority than any other stranger. You can't do this, she says, her composure finally cracking completely. These documents were created to protect you and David. I've spent 18 months caring for you, managing your household, ensuring your medical needs are met. You're having a paranoid episode, Margaret, and you're going to regret these accusations when you realize how wrong you are. But even as she speaks, I can see her mentally calculating her exit strategy. She knows the game is over, and now she's focused on damage control rather than maintaining her cover story. Actually, Cassandra, I can do exactly this, I say with satisfaction. It's my money, my property, and my life. You've been stealing from me while pretending to care about my well-being, but that ends today. You have two choices. You can leave quietly and hope I don't decide to press criminal charges, or you can continue this charade and face the full legal consequences of what you've done. Cassandra stands abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor with a sound like fingernails on a chalkboard. The mask is completely gone now, replaced by naked hostility that makes me grateful Jessica is waiting in the kitchen with recording equipment. You have no idea what you're doing, she says, her voice low and threatening. David will never believe your paranoid accusations against his wife. You're a confused old woman who's lost touch with reality, and everyone who matters knows it. If you try to destroy me, I'll make sure you spend your remaining years in a memory care facility where you belong. Her threat reveals the nuclear option she's been holding in reserve. If I challenge her authority, she's prepared to have me declared incompetent and institutionalized, using David's love and concern for me as weapons against my independence. It's a devastating strategy that would have worked if I hadn't discovered her true nature in time to protect myself. Cassandra, David is going to learn the truth about you whether I tell him or not, I say calmly. Jessica Martinez has prepared a comprehensive report that documents every aspect of your fraud. The evidence is irrefutable, and it's already been shared with my attorney and financial advisor. You can't threaten or manipulate your way out of this situation. For a moment, I think Cassandra might actually attack me physically. Her hands clench into fists, and her face contorts with rage that she's no longer bothering to conceal. But then her survival instincts reassert themselves, and she recognizes that violence would only make her legal situation worse. "This isn't over," she says, grabbing her purse from the chair where she'd placed it so casually just an hour ago. "You think you're protecting David, but you're destroying his happiness. He loves me, and he's going to hate you for what you're doing to our marriage." She stalks toward the door, then turns back for one final threat. "Enjoy your victory, Margaret. But remember that you're 78 years old and alone. I could have made your final years comfortable and dignified, but now you'll spend them fighting legal battles and wondering if your own son will ever forgive you." After Cassandra leaves, slamming the front door hard enough to rattle the windows, I sit in my study feeling emotionally drained but oddly triumphant. The confrontation went exactly as I'd hoped, forcing Cassandra to reveal her true character while confirming that my evidence was sufficient to destroy her carefully constructed facade. Jessica emerges from the kitchen where she's been recording the entire conversation through equipment she'd placed throughout the house with my permission. Her expression is grim but satisfied. "Mrs. Whitfield, that recording provides everything we need to support criminal charges if you decide to pursue them," she says. Her threats alone constitute elder abuse, and her admission about Harold Pemberton confirms the pattern of behavior that prosecutors look for in serial fraud cases. I'm not sure yet whether I want to involve criminal prosecutors. My primary goal was protecting myself and my assets, which I've accomplished. Whether Cassandra faces legal consequences beyond losing access to my fortune depends partly on how she handles the next phase of this situation. The next phase begins 2 hours later when David arrives at my house, his face flushed with anger and confusion. Cassandra has clearly told him her version of our confrontation, painting me as a paranoid elderly woman who's turned against the daughter-in-law, who's sacrificed everything to care for her. "Mom, what the hell did you say to Cassandra?" he demands, his voice higher than usual with stress. "She came home in tears, saying you've accused her of stealing from you and that you've had her investigated like a common criminal. This is insane behavior, even for you." The phrase "even for you" reveals how thoroughly Cassandra has poisoned David's perception of my mental state. In his mind, I've been declining for months, becoming increasingly difficult and unreasonable, and today's accusations represent a new low in my paranoid behavior. "David, sit down," I say gently. "I have some things to show you that are going to be difficult to hear." I spend the next hour walking David through Jessica's investigation, the financial records documenting Cassandra's theft, and the evidence of her previous crimes. I show him photographs of the art pieces that have been replaced with reproductions, bank records proving that the care services she claimed to provide were fictitious, and documentation of her real identity and criminal history. David's reaction evolves in stages as the evidence accumulates. First, disbelief and anger at what he sees as an attack on his wife. Then confusion as the documentation becomes impossible to dismiss. Finally, a terrible understanding as he realizes the scope of Cassandra's deception and his own role as an unwitting accomplice. "Mom, this can't be right," he says repeatedly, even as he stares at bank statements showing millions of dollars in fraudulent transfers. "Cassandra loves me. The fact that you believed her lies doesn't reflect poorly on your character. It reflects on hers." That evening, after David leaves to confront his wife with the evidence I've provided, I sit in my study with a glass of the good wine I've been saving for special occasions. Today feels like a special occasion, the day I took back control of my life and fortune from someone who thought she could steal both with impunity. The house feels different now, lighter somehow, as if Cassandra's malevolent presence had been weighing it down like a physical force. Tomorrow, I'll begin the process of recovering my stolen assets and rebuilding the security she systematically dismantled. I'll also start interviewing candidates for legitimate household help, people who will assist with my actual needs rather than manufacturing dependency for their own benefit. But tonight, I'm simply enjoying the satisfaction of outmaneuvering someone who thought she was smarter than me. Cassandra may have had youth and beauty on her side, but I had something more valuable. 78 years of experience recognizing threats and protecting what matters most. 3 weeks later, David calls to tell me that Cassandra has disappeared, leaving behind nothing but a brief note claiming she never loved him and only married him for access to my money. The note is probably the most honest thing she ever said to him. David has filed for divorce and contacted authorities about possible criminal prosecution, though Cassandra's disappearance makes legal action more complicated. I've also learned that I'm not her only recent victim. Jessica's investigation uncovered 2 other elderly victims in Connecticut and Maine who fell prey to similar schemes, losing a combined $4 million to Cassandra's sophisticated fraud operations. The FBI has opened an investigation into what appears to be an interstate elder abuse ring, with Cassandra as one of the primary suspects. As for my fortune, I've established the Margaret Whitfield Foundation for Elder Protection, a charitable organization dedicated to helping other seniors avoid the kind of predatory manipulation I experienced. The foundation will provide education about financial elder abuse, support for victims of such crimes, and advocacy for stronger legal protections for vulnerable adults. David has thrown himself into the foundation's work with the passion of someone seeking redemption for his unwitting complicity in his wife's crimes. Our relationship has been strengthened by surviving this crisis together, and I'm proud to see him channeling his anger and guilt into efforts that will protect other families from similar schemes. The house on Beacon Hill feels like home again, now that Cassandra's influence has been completely removed. I've hired Mrs. Patterson, a 60-year-old retired nurse who provides the household assistance I actually need without trying to control my life or steal my assets. More importantly, I've learned to trust my instincts about people and situations, something that will serve me well in whatever years I have remaining. Looking back, I realized that Cassandra's greatest mistake wasn't throwing away my medication or even stealing my money. Her greatest mistake was underestimating the intelligence and determination of a woman who spent 40 years building a business empire. She thought she was dealing with a confused elderly widow who would be grateful for any attention and too proud to ask for help. Instead, she encountered Margaret Whitfield, and Margaret Whitfield doesn't lose. 6 months after Cassandra's disappearance, I receive an unexpected phone call that changes everything I thought I knew about my ordeal. The caller is Detective Sarah Chen from the Boston Police Department's Elder Abuse Unit, and her news is both vindicating and deeply disturbing. Mrs. Whitfield, we've been investigating a network of individuals who target wealthy elderly victims for sophisticated financial fraud, Detective Chen explains during our meeting at police headquarters. Your case has become a cornerstone of our investigation, and we've uncovered evidence that suggests your experience was part of a much larger criminal enterprise. Detective Chen is a sharp-eyed woman in her early 40s who specializes in crimes against the elderly. Her office walls are covered with photographs and documents that appear to represent multiple ongoing investigations, and I can see my own case file among them, thick with evidence and documentation. What we've discovered is that Cassandra Murphy, or whatever her real name might be, was working with a network of at least 12 other individuals who use similar methods to target elderly victims across New England, she continues. They have a sophisticated system for identifying potential victims, establishing romantic or familial relationships, and systematically draining their assets over extended periods. The scope of the criminal network is staggering. Detective Chen shows me evidence of similar schemes in 6 different states, involving victims whose stories mirror my own experience almost exactly. Attractive younger women who marry into wealthy families, gradually assume control over elderly relatives' affairs, and systematically steal millions of dollars while maintaining the appearance of devoted caregivers. Mrs. Whitfield, your decision to fight back and document Cassandra's activities has provided us with the most comprehensive evidence we've seen of how these networks operate, Detective Chen explains. Most victims either don't realize they're being defrauded until it's too late, or they're too embarrassed to report the crimes. Your evidence has helped us identify patterns and connections that we wouldn't have seen otherwise. The investigation has revealed that my case was actually a relatively small operation compared to some of the network's other schemes. In Connecticut, an elderly pharmaceutical executive lost over $8 million to a similar con, while a retired judge in Maine was defrauded of his entire pension and investment portfolio worth nearly $6 million. The total known losses from this criminal network exceed $30 million, with investigators suspecting that many more victims remain unidentified. What's particularly sophisticated about this network is how they share information and resources, Detective Chen continues. They conduct extensive research on potential victims, including detailed financial investigations and psychological profiles. They know exactly how much money you have, what your vulnerabilities are, and what approach is most likely to succeed before they ever make contact. This revelation explains how Cassandra seemed to know exactly what I needed emotionally when she entered my life. Her apparent understanding of my loneliness, her interest in my business achievements, her careful cultivation of my trust. None of it was genuine insight or natural empathy. It was the result of careful research and planning, designed to exploit my specific psychological and financial vulnerabilities. Detective Chen shows me documents seized from other members of the network that include detailed profiles of potential victims throughout New England. My own file is several pages long, documenting everything from my net worth and investment portfolio to my relationship with David and my social isolation following Thomas's death. The level of detail is both impressive and deeply violating. They knew about your business success, your close relationship with your son, your desire to maintain your independence, and your vulnerability following your husband's death, Detective Chen explains. Cassandra was specifically chosen for your case because her profile and skills matched what they believed would be most effective in gaining your trust. The criminal network operates like a sophisticated business, with specialists who handle different aspects of the fraud. Some members focus on victim identification and research. Others specialize in establishing relationships and gaining trust, while still others handle the complex financial manipulations required to steal large amounts of money without detection. Cassandra was apparently one of their most successful operatives, with a track record of successful schemes dating back over 10 years. What we find most disturbing is how they've systematized the emotional manipulation, Detective Chen says. They have detailed protocols for different types of victims, scripts for common situations, and training materials that teach their operatives how to exploit specific vulnerabilities. It's elder abuse industrialized. The investigation has also revealed that David and I weren't Cassandra's only targets in Boston. While she was cultivating our family, she was simultaneously running smaller cons against at least 3 other elderly victims in the area. Her interior design business was actually a front that allowed her to gain access to wealthy homes and assess potential targets for future schemes. One of her other victims was Eleanor Hartwell, the 84-year-old widow of a prominent surgeon who lost nearly $500,000 to Cassandra's manipulations. Eleanor had hired Cassandra to redecorate her Beacon Hill home, never realizing that the charming young designer was systematically cataloging her valuables and financial resources while gaining access to her personal information. Mrs. Hartwell's case helped us understand how Cassandra operated multiple schemes simultaneously, Detective Chen explains. She would use information gained from one victim to enhance her credibility with others. For example, she mentioned your business success to Mrs. Hartwell as evidence of her connections to Boston's financial community. The interconnected nature of Cassandra's schemes means that her theft from my accounts was actually funding her operations against other victims. The money she stole from me was used to rent the expensive apartment where she entertained David, purchase the designer clothes that projected success and stability, and fund the lifestyle that convinced other targets of her legitimacy. Detective Chen's investigation has also uncovered the sophisticated money laundering operation the network uses to convert stolen assets into untraceable cash. Art pieces like the ones stolen from my collection are sold through a network of corrupt dealers and auction houses, while jewelry and other valuables are broken down and sold as raw materials to eliminate any possibility of identification. What's particularly clever about their approach is how they've structured the thefts to appear legitimate, Detective Chen explains. By using power of attorney documents and creating elaborate documentation for fictional care services, they've made it extremely difficult for banks and financial institutions to identify the fraud in progress. The investigation has revealed that several major financial institutions failed to detect obvious red flags in my case, including the sudden dramatic increase in account withdrawals and the pattern of transfers to suspicious entities. The network has exploited weaknesses in elder protection protocols that are supposed to prevent exactly this type of financial abuse. We're working with federal regulators to strengthen reporting requirements and detection systems, Detective Chen says. But the criminal networks are constantly evolving their methods to stay ahead of protective measures. Your case has been particularly valuable because it shows how sophisticated these schemes have become. The most disturbing revelation from Detective Chen's investigation is that Cassandra's disappearance wasn't random or panicked. It was part of a planned exit strategy that the network has used successfully in other cases when their operations are exposed. They have safe houses, false identities, and financial resources specifically designed to help their operatives escape prosecution and relocate to new hunting grounds. We believe Cassandra is currently operating under a different identity somewhere in the southeastern United States, Detective Chen explains. The network has successfully helped other operatives disappear and resume their criminal activities in new locations with new identities. It's a level of organization and resources that rivals legitimate businesses. This information is both frustrating and frightening. While I've protected myself and recovered most of my stolen assets, Cassandra is likely targeting new victims who have no idea of the danger they're facing. The network's ability to help its members escape consequences means that successful operations like mine might actually make them more dangerous to future victims. Detective Chen's investigation has led to federal charges against several members of the network, including 2 individuals who helped Cassandra launder the money she stole from my accounts. However, the sophisticated nature of their operations and their success in helping key operatives like Cassandra escape prosecution has made it difficult to completely dismantle their organization. What we're dealing with is essentially organized crime that targets elderly victims, Detective Chen explains. They have the resources, organization, and expertise of traditional criminal enterprises, but they've focused on a type of victim that law enforcement and the financial industry haven't adequately protected. The federal investigation has also revealed the international scope of the network's operations. Similar schemes are being run in Canada, the United Kingdom, and Australia, suggesting that elder fraud has become a global industry with billions of dollars in annual profits. The success of these operations has attracted increasingly sophisticated criminals who bring skills and resources typically associated with more traditional organized crime. My case has become part of a larger effort to develop new strategies for combating elder fraud networks. Law enforcement agencies are working with financial institutions to develop better detection systems, while legislators are considering new laws that would make it easier to prosecute these crimes and recover stolen assets. Mrs. Whitfield, your decision to fight back and document everything has made a real difference, Detective Chen tells me. Most victims of these schemes either don't realize what's happening until it's too late, or they're too embarrassed to report the crimes. Your evidence and your willingness to pursue prosecution has helped us understand how these networks operate and develop strategies to combat them. The investigation has also led to an unexpected personal revelation. While reviewing Cassandra's communications with her network, investigators discovered that she had been specifically instructed to monitor my health and report any signs of serious illness or decline. The network apparently had contingency plans for accelerating their operations if victims became seriously ill or appeared likely to die soon. They actually had protocols for what they call endgame scenarios, Detective Chen explains with obvious disgust. If a victim's health declined rapidly, they would implement emergency procedures to maximize asset recovery before the victim died or their family became suspicious. This discovery makes Cassandra's casual disposal of my heart medication even more sinister. It wasn't simply a thoughtless act motivated by aesthetic preferences. It was potentially part of a calculated effort to accelerate my health decline and create an emergency situation that would justify more aggressive financial manipulation. The thought that my daughter-in-law was monitoring my health for signs that she could exploit makes me feel violated in ways that go beyond the financial theft. She wasn't just stealing my money. She was watching for opportunities to capitalize on my physical vulnerability and potential death. Detective Chen's investigation has also revealed the psychological profiles the network develops for their operatives. Cassandra was specifically chosen for my case because her personality assessment indicated she would be effective at manipulating intelligent, successful women who had experienced recent loss. Her training included specific techniques for exploiting grief, loneliness, and the desire to maintain family connections. What's particularly disturbing is how they've systematized the emotional manipulation, Detective Chen explains. They have detailed training materials that teach their operatives how to identify and exploit specific emotional vulnerabilities. It's psychological warfare applied to financial crime. The training materials seized from other network members include scripts for common conversations, techniques for gradually isolating victims from their support systems, and methods for creating artificial crises that justify increased control over victims' affairs. Cassandra's performance as my devoted daughter-in-law was the result of extensive training and careful preparation, rather than natural ability or inspiration. These revelations have fundamentally changed how I understand my experience with Cassandra. What I initially saw as a personal betrayal by someone I trusted was actually a carefully executed criminal operation that exploited research-based knowledge of my specific vulnerabilities. In a strange way, this knowledge is both more disturbing and oddly comforting. More disturbing because of the calculated nature of the manipulation, but comforting because it confirms that my trust and affection weren't misplaced due to poor judgment, but were the result of sophisticated criminal techniques designed to exploit normal human emotions. Detective Chen's investigation has also provided closure for other victims who had blamed themselves for falling prey to similar schemes. Eleanor Hartwell, the surgeon's widow who lost money to Cassandra's interior design con, had been convinced that her loneliness and desire for companionship had made her an easy target. Learning about the network's sophisticated research and manipulation techniques helped her understand that she was targeted specifically because of her strengths and successes, rather than her weaknesses. These criminals are successful because they exploit positive human qualities like trust, generosity, and love, Detective Chen explains. They target people who are successful, intelligent, and caring because those are the people most likely to have substantial assets and the emotional openness that makes manipulation possible. The federal investigation has led to the creation of new educational programs designed to help elderly individuals and their families recognize the warning signs of sophisticated financial fraud. My case has become part of training materials used by law enforcement agencies, financial institutions, and elder care organizations throughout the country. The Margaret Whitfield Foundation has become a partner in these educational efforts, using my experience and the evidence from Detective Chen's investigation to develop comprehensive resources for preventing elder fraud. David has thrown himself into this work with the passion of someone seeking to transform his personal trauma into protection for others. Mom, working on the foundation has helped me understand that we weren't victims because we were weak or gullible. David tells me during one of our weekly dinners. We were victims because we were successful enough to be worth targeting and caring enough to be vulnerable to emotional manipulation. Those aren't character flaws. They're the qualities that make us human. David's marriage to Cassandra has left him with complex feelings about trust and relationships, but it has also given him insight into the sophisticated nature of the manipulation we experienced. His legal training has proven valuable in developing new protective strategies and advocating for stronger laws against elder fraud. 6 months after Detective Chen's initial contact, the federal investigation has led to indictments against 8 members of the criminal network, including the individuals who helped launder the money stolen from my accounts. While Cassandra herself remains at large, the disruption of her support network has significantly reduced the likelihood that she can continue operating successfully. More importantly, the investigation has led to the recovery of over $12 million in stolen assets that are being returned to victims throughout New England. While I had already recovered most of my losses through private action, the federal investigation has helped other victims who lacked the resources or knowledge to protect themselves independently. The experience has taught me that elder fraud is not a problem that individual victims can solve alone. It requires coordinated action by law enforcement, financial institutions, and the broader community to develop effective protective strategies. My decision to fight back against Cassandra was successful in my specific case, but it took federal investigation to address the larger criminal network that made her operations possible. As I reflect on the past year, I realized that my battle with Cassandra was both more personal and more significant than I initially understood. On a personal level, it was about reclaiming my autonomy and protecting my relationship with David from someone who sought to exploit and destroy it. On a broader level, it was about exposing a sophisticated criminal enterprise that threatens elderly individuals throughout the country. The Margaret Whitfield Foundation continues to grow, funded not just by my resources but by donations from other elder fraud victims and their families who want to transform their experiences into protection for others. We've developed educational programs, victim support services, and advocacy initiatives that are making a real difference in communities throughout New England. Detective Chen visits periodically to update me on the ongoing investigation and to consult on new cases that show similar patterns to my experience with Cassandra. Her work has helped me understand that my case was both typical and unusual. Typical in the sophistication of the manipulation techniques used, but unusual in the victim's ability to recognize the fraud and fight back effectively. Mrs. Whitfield, your case has become a model for how victims can protect themselves and help law enforcement combat these crimes, Detective Chen tells me during her most recent visit. The evidence you gathered and your willingness to pursue prosecution has helped us develop new strategies that are being used nationwide. The ongoing federal investigation has revealed that elder fraud networks are constantly evolving their techniques to stay ahead of protective measures. They monitor law enforcement strategies, study successful prosecutions, and adapt their methods to exploit new vulnerabilities. Combating these crimes requires continuous vigilance and adaptation by both potential victims and the institutions that serve them. Looking forward, I'm committed to using my remaining years to advance the fight against elder fraud. The Foundation has established partnerships with law enforcement agencies, financial institutions, and elder care organizations to develop comprehensive protective strategies. We're also funding research into the psychological and social factors that make elderly individuals vulnerable to sophisticated manipulation. Most importantly, we're working to change the narrative around elder fraud, from one of victim blaming to one of recognizing the sophisticated nature of these crimes and the need for systemic protective measures. Too many victims have been made to feel ashamed or embarrassed about being targeted by criminals who use research-based manipulation techniques that would be effective against almost anyone. My experience with Cassandra taught me that intelligence, success, and caution are not sufficient protection against sophisticated criminal enterprises that have systematized the exploitation of human emotions and vulnerabilities. Effective protection requires community-wide awareness, institutional safeguards, and coordinated law enforcement action. But it also taught me that individual victims are not powerless against these crimes. With proper support, resources, and determination, it is possible to fight back effectively and help protect others from similar victimization. The key is recognizing that elder fraud is not a personal failing but a serious crime that requires serious responses. As I write this, sitting in my study, surrounded by evidence of both the crimes committed against me and the justice achieved through fighting back, I feel proud of what we've accomplished. Cassandra may have disappeared to target new victims, but her network has been significantly disrupted, millions of dollars have been recovered for victims, and new protective measures are being implemented that will make future schemes more difficult. More importantly, my relationship with David has emerged stronger from this crisis, built on a foundation of shared truth rather than manipulation and deception. We've learned to trust each other's judgment while remaining vigilant against future threats, and we've found purpose in protecting others from the kind of victimization we experienced. The house on Beacon Hill remains my sanctuary, but it's no longer isolated from the world as it was during Cassandra's manipulation. It's become a center for the Foundation's work and a gathering place for other survivors who are transforming their experiences into protection for the broader community. Looking back, I realized that Cassandra's greatest mistake wasn't underestimating my individual strength or determination. Her greatest mistake was underestimating the power of an elderly woman who refuses to be silenced, who has the resources to fight back, and who understands that justice requires not just personal vindication, but systemic change. Margaret Whitfield built a business empire by recognizing opportunities and threats, developing effective strategies, and executing them with precision and determination. Those same skills proved equally effective in combating elder fraud and building protections for other potential victims. The war against elder fraud is far from over, but we've won some important battles. And as long as I have strength and resources, I'll continue fighting to protect other elderly individuals from predators like Cassandra, who see our accumulated wealth and wisdom as targets for exploitation rather than achievements to be respected. That fight is my legacy now, more important than any business success or financial achievement. It's the difference between being remembered as someone who built wealth and being remembered as someone who used that wealth to protect others. And in the end, that's exactly the kind of legacy Margaret Whitfield wants to leave behind. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.